Welcome to What Healthy Couples Know That You Don't, a podcast dedicated to helping you create the relationship you truly want.
Creating a more satisfying relationships. Welcome. Today you are keeping it real with Rhoda. Relationships can be very confusing. We are taught reading, science, history, and if we are lucky, sex ed, but not anything about what creates trust, why repair is important, or how to communicate, especially when we are vulnerable. Learning about connections, how to build them and keep them is sorely missing. Watching characters on TV only adds to our bewilderment. When all women orgasm from intercourse, when the reality is 70% of women do not orgasm from intercourse. This is just one example. All the characters in movies are smart and funny because they have scripts when we don't. You all know that I believe that relationships are a lot of work. The ability to stay self-aware and committed to being a better person for your partner is a big challenge, especially when there are so many other priorities tugging at us for our attention. Everybody can benefit from learning more about how to make relationships work. There are tangible improvements that you can make, like the Gottman's emphasis on turning towards each other as crucial and predicting divorce on how often a couple turns away from each other, which was discussed in episode 103. According to the American Psychological Association, approximately 40 to 50% of first marriages end in divorce. The divorce rate for second marriages is even higher, with approximately 60 to 67% of second marriages ending in divorce. Overall, the rate of divorce in America is falling. Divorces among people aged 50 plus are rising. Fewer couples choose to marry than pre-1990. The U.S. divorce rate is the third highest in the world. According to a 2013 survey of 191 certified divorce financial analyst professionals from across North America, the three leading causes of divorce are basic incompatibility, 43%, infidelity, 28%, and money issues, 22%. Marriage requires work to understand the tools we all need to make them last. Because, as Daniel Wild said, choosing a partner is choosing a set of problems. Jonah Lehrer is the author of A Book About Love, and he cites a 2010 study of 23,000 married couples that found that the similarity of spouses accounted for less than 0.5% of spousal satisfaction. In short, what we think we want in a spouse, someone who is just like us and likes all the same things, is not what we really want. I believe opposites do attract, but this demands a huge respect for the differences, which can erode over time. So there is the work of a relationship to restore respect, especially in years 6 to 10, when so many relationships struggle with whether or not to stay together. It's such an ordinary developmental time. This podcast is a labor of love to offer wisdom from many sources to help you learn how to do better in your relationships. Today's guest is just as invested in helping relationships last as I am. Today's source of wisdom is Dr. Wyatt Fisher. He is a licensed psychologist and has been in private practice in Boulder, Colorado, specializing in marriage counseling since 2004. He is the author of the Total Marriage Refresh Marriage book and a fellow podcaster on the Dr. Wyatt Show Marriage Podcast, and created Keep the Glow Couples app. He's been married 24 years, while this August I've been married 50. Okay, so my first question is, one study of long-lasting love and marriage found that South Dakota actually has the highest marriage score of any state in the country. Iowa was second and Wisconsin was third. So my question is, how do you help people become truly dedicated to spending their lives with their partner no matter the challenges? What helps someone become more committed?
You can talk to people about the importance of a covenant mindset, which is this long-term commitment. But from my experience, the main way you're going to help someone become more committed is to help them become happier in the relationship, because commitment often is a byproduct of how we feel, whether we like it or not. And so I've seen couples where one partner is trying to convince the other partner to become more committed. And again, there is some merit to that. However, what I often tell that person is, don't try to convince your partner to become more committed. Try to make your partner happier, and that will automatically make them more committed to the relationship.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. And what's one thing that you think helps people understand happiness? Because it's such a big word.
Yeah. When I define happiness, I think more about their top fillers that they need in their relationship to feel loved and satisfied, whether it's quality time or emotional connection or sexual connection or words of affirmation. It's this combination of maximizing your partner's fillers of what they desire while you also reduce and eliminate the drainer behaviors that you do that your partner does not like. Because if you're doing an amazing job on the fillers your partner desires, but you're also doing a lot of drainer behaviors, the drainers they're gonna wipe out all the fillers. It's gonna be a wash. And so the goal for all of us to become really good partners is to learn to maximize our partner's fillers they desire, while we also simultaneously reduce and eliminate the drainers that we do that they don't like.
Yeah, I really like that. Fillers and drainers. Yeah, I like the polarity of that, of course.
Yeah.
I believe most fights are really power struggles hidden in fighting about small things. It seems so easy to have the same fights over and over again with your partner. So help us learn more about how we get stuck in a negative, reactionary conflict cycle with each other.
Yeah, I mean, there's two ways we could go with that. The one would be the power side of things, where a lot of decisions when you're married to someone is about who's going to have the final say. You know, who is going to call the final shot here on this topic. And often marriages are made up of one partner who's a little more dominant and one who's a little more passive. So you get into this vicious cycle before long of one person having too much power, the other partner having too little power, and then that creates power imbalance and resentment. The person who has the more dominant personality can start resenting their partner for not being more vocal on what they want. And then the more passive partner can become resentful because they feel voiceless and that their opinion doesn't matter as much. So when that's the line, and if that's the issue, then it's often teaching couples how to share power, how to recognize we're having a power battle, how to recognize we're not sharing power. And even putting that into words can go a long way to teach couples to be able to say, I don't feel like we're sharing power right now. I don't feel like I have an equal voice right now. Even that can help put to words what's going on and highlight the awareness, bring out the dynamic. And then it's a matter of teaching the skills of, okay, if we are at an impasse, how are we going to meet in the middle? How do we compromise? It's really an art, and it starts with respect of the different positions, because you don't want to view a sharing power topic with the goal of, I'm going to try to talk you out of your position. You're not being a salesman or a saleswoman. You're really respecting your partner's position, and then that frees you up to use your mental energy to think about, how can we meet in the middle? How can we compromise? How can we strike a win-win? That's going to be some of what you want and some of what I want.
Yes. And I think a lot of couples come in and talk about having communication problems. And really, I think it's ultimately about power struggles. So I really like that idea of identifying it and helping them see that. That's great. How can my audience improve at sharing power with their partner beyond what you just suggested?
So I teach a tool called Bounce the Ball. And so the analogy with this is sports. So if you think about soccer or basketball, nobody likes a ball hog. And the ball hog is the person who dribbles all down the court and then they shoot. And even coaches don't like ball hogs because that's why they have rules where you have to pass a certain amount of times before you can shoot. In marriage, a ball hog is the person who doesn't share power. And they tell you what they think should happen, and they're not open to discussing it. That's a ball hog. And so the skill I teach is called Bounce the Ball. And what you do is if you find yourself at an impasse with your partner on a decision, you say, hey, can we bounce the ball on this? And what that means is it doesn't matter who begins, but partner A will say, this is my opinion on the decision, and here's my value underneath the position. Here's why I'm landing at this place, on this position, on this topic. And then they bounce the ball by saying the phrase, what do you think? Because then that turns it into a conversation. That invites your partner into this dialogue so we can share power on this topic. Then partner B does the same. They share their opinion on this topic, the value they have underneath that opinion. Then they bounce the ball back and say, what do you think? Now, before I go forward, it's the reason it's so important to share the value underneath is because that provides a lot more data to your partner who's going to start thinking about a win-win and a compromise. It's much different to hear just the face value of what your partner thinks compared to when you hear what's underneath that for them, what's fueling that opinion, what's driving that position for them. When you have all that data, now your mind can become very creative with thinking of solutions that's going to honor their values and yours. So back to the tool, once you both have shared your initial positions and your values under that position, now things start to change. Now partner A has the ball again, and they have to make a few adjustments from their original position toward their partner's position without leaving their own position, because this is about striking a win-win. It's not about giving in. So then they make a few adjustments toward their partner's position, and they suggest this new idea, and then they say the phrase, what do you think? And then partner B has to do the same. They have to come toward their partner's position by a few degrees off of their original position. And then they say their new idea. And then they say, what do you think? And they bounce the ball back. And if both partners are teachable and buy into this value of shared power, if you keep doing that process long enough, you will strike a win-win.
I like that. So I'm sure you're aware of the 2006 study by Keith Oatley that determined people can improve their empathy by reading literary fiction. I love to read because they are stories of the human experience. How else can someone improve upon their own empathy with a partner?
So there's an exercise I encourage my couples that I work with to do, and I call it the empathy variable exercise. And what it is it's a list of questions that you interview your partner about, and then they're going to interview you. And then you want to take notes and write down their responses. So some of the questions in that exercise include, what were the most hurtful things for you experienced growing up? What were your top values in your family growing up? What are some of your top values now as an adult? What are some of your top insecurities now as an adult? What are your top stressors? What are your top goals for the future? What are your top needs in our marriage? Those are huge questions. And to slow down and really think through, how would I respond to those questions? And then you sit down with your partner and you take turns asking each other those questions, and then you write down the responses. That process, you'll learn a lot about your partner, and you probably have to do it every so often to stay updated, because a lot of those things may change. Not necessarily the history things, but definitely the current state of affairs, what they're feeling, and future goals, things like that will evolve. But if you do that exercise, and then if you really want to get an A+, review your partner's responses to that exercise before you have your, I call it a head-heart check, your time to talk with your partner about your days, stressors, things day to day to stay updated. Because if you're talking to your partner or listening to them vent about their day while you're mindful of all those things who make them who they are, then it's almost like a math problem where you'll hear them talk about something that's upsetting them, and in your mind you'll be thinking, oh, I bet that connects to that wound they had growing up. Or, oh, that's one of their top stressors. No wonder that's making them upset. Or, oh, that's one of their goals from their future they've talked about, and it's probably getting blocked. So it will give you a different mindset for listening to your partner vent about their day. And then when that occurs, you can start providing empathy with sincerity, even if you personally don't relate or you personally don't agree, because in that moment, you're literally starting to see the situation from their vantage point. And then you can say comments like, oh, that makes sense, or no wonder you feel like that. You can say those comments with genuineness because you're trying to see that situation from their life experience.
I really like that. You're fattening up the context, and you're thinking about them in a bigger picture. And I think that's
right.
really, really helpful. So
Yes.
that was really good. Thank you. Please
Sure.
share 2 ways a couple can cultivate emotional intimacy.
Yeah, so the tool I teach on this is called the head-heart check. And there's a couple steps to it. First of all, why even do it, right? Why even cultivate emotional intimacy? The reason is because at least one partner, that's probably their top need, is emotional intimacy. And they're probably married to someone whose top need is sexual intimacy. And often before sexual intimacy is going to occur, emotional intimacy needs to be in place first. So emotional intimacy is a learning curve for a lot of people if it's not your natural need. And this is a way to do it in a real simple step-by-step way so that it can become something that you and your partner do on a regular basis. So the first step is getting in touch with yourself. And it takes just maybe a few moments, a few minutes to stop and think, what was I feeling today and why? The big 4 to consider is mad, sad, glad, or fear. And then to think about, why was I feeling those things? Maybe I felt one of those, maybe 2 of those, maybe all 4 of those today. And then what were the possible reasons? Most people who don't have emotional intimacy as their need, they can tell you what they did throughout the day, but they'll struggle telling you what they felt while they did those things. But emotional intimacy is not just becoming a good listener, it's also sharing from our own life. That's why both partners need to take a few moments before the head-heart check to just get in touch with themselves. What was I feeling today, and why was I feeling it? Now, it doesn't mean you have to share everything, because if you're not used to sharing, it may be uncomfortable. And so the analogy I use is a garage door. So in the beginning, maybe just start with raising that garage door about a foot. And that's how much you share, just to get comfortable, see if it feels safe, see how your partner responds. And then if things go well, over time, you can gradually raise that garage door and share more. So the question you ask each other during the head-heart check is, what's been on your head and heart? That's all you ask. It's very simple. What's been on your head and heart? So what you share is what you were just reflecting on. So you may have had some anger, and so you share all the possible reasons why. Maybe you had some fear and anxiety, so you share all the possible reasons why. And the way to share feelings that I encourage is to think of it like a paper where the feeling is the title at the top of the paper, and then the words underneath the title are all the possible reasons why. So that format of sharing keeps it more organized, so it's not darting all over the place, which can make it harder as the listener to respond to and track. And so the feeling is the title, and then the words underneath that are the possible reasons why. So there's 2 ground rules when you are listening to this and when you're participating in the head-heart check. The one ground rule is you can't say anything negative about your partner during the head-heart check. Because if you do, your partner's going to avoid it. They're going to think, well, that's time for me to criticize. I don't want to do that stupid head-heart check. And so it has to be about anything beyond your marriage, unless it's something positive. So the head-heart check is where you share about your work, you share about your health, you share about your friends, you share about your hobbies. Everything that's unrelated to your marriage is what you talk about during that head-heart check to keep it safe. The second ground rule is when you're listening to your partner vent, you're not allowed to give any advice unless they ask you for advice. So unless you hear them say, what do you think I should do? Or if you're in my shoes, how would you respond? Unless you hear that, the only thing you can say in response is empathy. And this is where the empathy variable exercise comes in that we just talked about. So the best empathy statements to master is, that makes sense, or I can see how you'd feel X because of Y, or no wonder you feel X, whatever the emotional word is. Providing empathy followed by silence is one of the most profound ways to help someone feel understood and like they're not alone. And if you're a fixer, the thing I say to a lot of people who are fixers, I'm a fixer. I've had to learn to not fix because my wife is the one who has a high need for emotional intimacy. I've had to learn how to share what I feel because it's been a skill I've had to learn in my own marriage. But the thing I tell fixers is you can't turn off the fixer mode. However, you have to change the target of what you're trying to fix. And so when your partner is venting, instead of trying to fix the presenting problem, think about fixing them feeling alone in that problem. And the best way to fix that is through empathy.
I don't know if you ever saw the movie White Men Can't Jump. It's a wonderful movie. It really is. Ron Shelton's a terrific writer and director. But Rosie Perez is in bed with Woody Harrelson, and she says, I'm thirsty. And Woody gets out of bed, starts to get out of bed to go, and she says, where are you going? And he says, I'm going to get you a glass of water. And she goes, why can't you just be with me in my thirstiness? And I love that. And so I do think men more often are interested in fixing and doing or joking you out of it, trying to solve it in some way.
Yes.
And so I talk to them about witnessing, that being a witness can be really enough. And sometimes that's hard to understand. Yeah.
It is. Yeah. Be a witness unless they say, go get out of bed and get me a drink. Just sit there and listen to how they're thirsty.
Let's see. I believe love is being willing to do the work of being a better partner. Relationships grow us into being a better version of ourselves. What do you think love is?
I think love can be a multitude of different things. But I think at the core of it is this commitment to this relationship to continually grow both you and your partner, because it is about growth, and marriage is the ultimate refinement tool where you're going to be getting feedback from your partner if you stay with this person for any length of time, and you have a choice. You can either reject that feedback or you can look for that kernel of truth in the feedback and grow from that. But yeah, I think love is a choice to work at this relationship that's not going to always be pretty. It's not going to always be pleasant, but it's a continual choice to come back and to keep working at it. And as long as both partners are willing to keep working at it, love is always possible and having a good marriage is always possible.
Yeah, I agree. You have a blog post on sexy games for couples. Could you share one and any other advice for those stuck in sexless marriages? I just read that 39% of American couples don't have sex, and I think that's incredibly sad. And sexless is 10 times or less a year, according to Barry McCarthy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when it comes to sexless marriages, I have a pyramid that I encourage couples to consider called the wedding cake model. And the first rung on that pyramid to have better sex is resolving your resentments. It's hard to have sex with someone you resent. And so often couples start at the wrong spot. If they want to have a better sexual relationship, they start with sex techniques and sex toys and sex games, and that's not the place to begin. The place to begin, in my opinion, is you have to first build the relationship so it has a foundation for sex to even make sense. And the first place to begin for that is resolving your resentments. So you have to first heal those resentments. The second prong or tier going up in the pyramid is building the friendship. And so this is where you want to start increasing affection with your partner, start having your head-heart checks for emotional intimacy, start having some dates throughout the week so you can cultivate some fun. You want to feel this friendship with your partner. It's hard to have sex with someone you're not friends with. And so that becomes the second tier on that pyramid. The third tier on that pyramid is sensual time. And this may or may not turn sexual. So this could include a sensual massage, or cuddling together, or a bath together, or a shower together. And so a lot of couples don't have any sensual time together to just get acclimated to one another in that realm. And a lot of low libido partners need that time to slowly build arousal. And so sensual activity at that point becomes a recommended activity to practice with your partner just to get comfortable with each other on a more intimate level. And then the top tier is sexual. So that often can happen at the end of sensual time if both partners are open to it. But I encourage couples when they get up to that sexual tier, which is the top tier of that pyramid, to remember voice and choice, where often if you're married for a while, it can feel like the only options are intercourse or nothing. And if you're low libido, often you're going to choose nothing because you just may not be up for intercourse. Pleasure goes down for the majority of females who are lower libido. Even if you're not low libido, majority of females, pleasure goes down after intercourse because there's not enough clitoral stimulation. And so instead, to approach sexual contact more like a buffet. So there's options like, well, what should we do tonight? Well, maybe we just make out, or maybe it's everything above the waist, or maybe it's manual below the waist, or maybe it's oral above and below the waist. If you can think of it as options, it brings back voice and choice, in particular for the low libido partner, because often low libido partners, they experience obligation sex. And research shows when you're under obligation sex, libido gets even worse. And your partner who's high libido may get your body, but they don't get your soul. And so it's a lose-lose experience.
Yeah, that's really a great point. What other tools do you recommend to a couple trying to have a long-lasting relationship?
Well, I really recommend tending to the love buckets. So this is an app I created even for this called Keep the Glow, and this is the fillers and the drainers. So you want to have some type of method to keep lines of communication open on the top fillers that you need to feel loved and satisfied, and the top drainers that your partner does that makes you feel negative toward them. These are the items that build resentments when they're not discussed, because a lot of your fillers are not being met, and instead your partner's doing all these drainers that you don't like, that hurts your feelings or offends you or makes you feel negative toward them. And if those items are not communicated about and tended to on a regular basis, that's what snuffs out the fire in the relationship. So if you want a long-term healthy relationship, it's a matter of keeping the lines of communication open on how are we doing with both of our fillers, how are we doing with both of these drainers, so that we can continually grow and improve ourselves at filling up each other's love buckets. And the higher we can keep those love buckets, the more happy we're going to be, the stronger our commitment, the more likely we're going to stay together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I love that your blog talks about there are times not to get a divorce. Could you say more about this?
Yeah, so when it comes to divorce, there is a time and place for divorce. Namely, if there is adultery that's unrepented, the person won't break contact with the affair person. If there's abuse, and under the umbrella of abuse could be chronic neglect. And if there's abandonment, you come home and your partner's gone and there's a note. And so I think it is important to, first of all, acknowledge that there is a time and place for divorce, and that's okay. Sometimes it is the recommendation. However, there's a lot of times over and beyond those three scenarios, adultery, abuse, and abandonment, that people get a divorce for just because they're bored or they're just not as in love or their needs may not be being met for that season. And so one thing I encourage couples to think about is if it's not one of those 3A's, to not give up. Because if you and your partner are willing to keep working at your relationship, couples can and do fall in and out of love over the duration of the relationship. And we have this Disney expectation that if you fall, first of all, everything should be about being in love and pleasure and feeling great. And if you fall out of love, you're doomed. And that's not true. You can actually fall back in love. And that's what the love buckets do, the fillers and the drainers. You start maximizing your partner's fillers while reducing the drainers. Do that long enough and they're going to fall back in love with you, and vice versa. So the thing to consider if you're thinking of divorce, first of all, is, are my partner and I both willing to keep working at this? If the answer is yes, do not give up, because that means there is still hope. It also can be helpful to speak with a third party, objective person about, hey, this is what I'm experiencing. What do you think? Because often we get lost in our marriage and we lose our way and we start feeling overwhelmed and helpless. But if you have like a close friend or a therapist or a coach speaking into your experience, they can give you perspective. And often we need that perspective. And so those are some of the things that I would encourage for couples to consider who are thinking of divorce.
Any other wisdom you want to share with us today? My last question.
Yeah, I think it's important to remember that your marriage is alive. And so if you tend to it and nurture it, it can grow just like anything else that's alive. But if you deprive it and neglect it, it will wilt and die. So it's very transformational, I think, to think of our relationships as a living organism. So if you have a plant and you put it under your desk and you deprive it of sun, you don't water it, you don't fertilize it, that plant starts to wilt and die. And that's what we do to our marriage. We get married and then the focus goes outward to kids and mortgage and 401ks and hobbies. And we take our eye off the ball. We take our eye off our partner. And by doing that, it starts to suffer. But if you can start thinking about, what would we need to resurrect or to resuscitate our relationship? What's the water we would need? What's the sunlight we would need? What's the fertilizer we would need? If we can start feeding our relationship, it can respond and it can grow, but it's not going to happen by itself. It takes intentionality, but it's worth it in the end.
So I don't know if you read, but the New York Times had an article that said plants communicate. And
I did see that.
And I listened to it. Did you listen to it? They had a little.
No, I saw that though. That they make noise when they're
noises. It's pop.
Yes.
It's like if they're dehydrated, and if you're whacking them. And I was whacking a pine tree this afternoon, and I was talking to it and going, "I'm sorry," but I thought that was the coolest thing in the world.
Yes, that's really interesting.
So where would people be able to get a hold of you, and what would you like them to know about you?
Sure. Yeah, the best way to get in touch with me or to learn more about me is my podcast called The Dr. Wyatt Show. I usually put out an episode once a week. They're usually about 15 minutes long. They're very direct, a lot of takeaways. So that's the best place, the Dr. Wyatt Show podcast. My website is drwyattfisher.com, and I'm on all the major social channels, and you can find me at Dr. Wyatt Fisher.
If you love this podcast, we'd love for you to subscribe, rate, and give a review on iTunes or Spotify. I'm particularly going to ask for that because some turkey left a 1-star review saying it was political with no relationship advice. And I've made perhaps 2 political cracks for over 100 episodes. So I'd like some help. My website has over 450 pages of free info with no ads, and show notes for this episode can be found there. Until next time.
Thank you for listening to What Healthy Couples Know That You Don't. If you have enjoyed the show, please leave a rating and review on iTunes and help get the word out. To learn more or connect with Rhoda, visit therapyideas.net.